In this interview, George is going to be talking about his parents, where they came from in Romania, and what they did as soon as they got here, and how they met. They both came at different times, but I'll turn it over to George, and so he'll narrate the story now.
Well, my mother came in 1914 to Canton, Ohio, and lived in with her brother, who was settled in Canton, Ohio, and had a son and wife. And she lived in Canton until 1916, where my father, who was living in Detroit, was looking for a wife, a Romanian wife. And I heard a lot of Romanian girls in Canton, Ohio, so he came from Detroit to Canton, Ohio, and met my mother, and at that time, a lassie, who was, and other Romanian girls, and somehow he became attracted to Rafira, my mother, and went back to Detroit, and then he decided that he was going to go back to Canton, Ohio, and marry my mother, which was very soon after he first met her. So they got married in Canton. It was in 1916, then, the tail end of 1916, and December. And then they decided, when he met her again in 1916, in December, on the 30th of December, they went to the Canton City Hall and got a marriage license, and that was in January, or January the 1st. So they got their marriage license in January, and moved up to Detroit in the 1st of January.
Okay, and going back to your mother, your father came over in 1907, and he was about 21 years old. He was born in 1886, and your mother came over in 1914, as you said. She was about 16. So your dad was approximately 10 or 12 years older than she was.
He was 10 years older.
Okay. And when your dad first got to the U.S. in 1907, he started down in West Virginia.
And he worked his way over. When he first came to the United States, he didn't know anybody. Only he was graduate. I've heard of Romanians in Ohio and Detroit. So he worked his way off from New York to West Virginia, and he gradually wound up in Detroit. But in the meanwhile, he was doing all kinds of jobs, and was traveling back to his final destination, which was Detroit.
And he lived in a dormitory while he was in Detroit?
Well, they lived in a rooming house, and a bunch of men all lived in a rooming house. And of course, all were single. They were all bachelors looking for wives, and there weren't too many girls, Romanian girls at that time. But there were some in Canton, Ohio, and that's where my mother was living with her brother at that time, and she was just a single girl.
Okay, let's go back to the reason why your father left Romania in the first place. How it actually came about.
Well, I don't know exactly how it came about, but when he decided to leave his homestead, so he and his brothers, they pulled whatever assets they had. They had a pair of oxen, and they sold the oxen and split the money. And my father, with that amount of money, which was around $25, migrated from the village of Lisa to Dobrojan in Romania, which was near the Black Sea. And he worked there on different ranches and places. as a farmhand, and then he decided to come to America. And the next thing I know, he was settled in Detroit when he did come.
And he left through Germany on a ship
Right,
and went through Ellis Island
right.
and then made his way to West Virginia, Ohio, and then up to Detroit. All right. Anything else to add to that right now?
No, really, although as he was gradually traveling to Detroit, he had different jobs at different places to find money to keep, to be able to travel. And of course, I don't know, then he wound up in Detroit with a bunch of other bachelors, and he started a store, a Romanian store, so he had a lot of Romanian customers.
Now, how did he start that store?
All I know is that he started it. He saved his money, and he was an entrepreneur at that time. He had an objective to own his own business, and all the other bachelors weren't that ambitious. So he saved the money and then bought rented the facility, the store, and it was a local grocery store located among Romanian families and Russian families and Hungarian families, all a foreign neighborhood.
And whereabouts in Detroit was this neighborhood?
It's on the east side of Detroit. It's located on Joseph Campo, which started at the Detroit River. We were 3 blocks from Detroit River, and that's where he got the store. And it was a main thoroughfare, and there's a ferry that serviced Detroit and the Windsor area. And you could ride the ferry for a nickel to get to Walkerville, Ontario. And if you didn't get off the boat, you could come back on that same nickel.
So there were 2 ferries actually that went across.
Right.
All right. And Walkerville, I believe, is the old name for Windsor.
Right.
Okay. Anything else to add to that?
Well, Walkerville was on the Canadian side, and that happened to be a very clean side of the Detroit River, whereas along the Detroit River there's a lot of sewage that was dumped into the Detroit River. So when I was selling papers at the ferry, at the Walkerville ferry, we would ride to Windsor and find a place where we could get dressed and go swimming in the Detroit River, which was on the Canadian side of the Detroit River. And
Now, this was before you got married, isn't it?
Oh, this is when I was 10.
Before he got married.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. He was already married. This is when you were a young child.
Yes.
Okay.
So when we wanted to go swimming in the Detroit River, we always would go to the Canada side because of the much cleaner side. Although I learned to swim on the Detroit side in the cleaner spots of the Detroit River.
Okay, well, let's wrap up this interview right now, and we'll go to the next topic.